Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, October 9th, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to share with you today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 today with her unique point of view. Next Wednesday, Doug Eberhardt of Buy Gold and Silver Safely will be our third-hour guest talking about developments in the metals versus paper trade. Looks like that's starting to really strain at the least, so to speak. And on Thursday, we will have Arthur Topham, who is facing jail in Canada for criticizing the government of Israel, and he'll be our guest as well. Now then, getting on to the news. Let's see. Ron Paul was interviewed on Fox Business, and he basically came out and said, there is no reason in the world for us to be involved in Syria. Now, there is, but nobody can talk about it. Ron Paul is basically saying that all this talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the war on terror, everybody knows it's a complete bluff now. Everybody knows it's a complete bluff. And there is the U.S. has no legal grounds to be in Syria, or for that matter, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these other countries. Now, U.S. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard is out there saying, look, if Russia is bombing Al-Qaeda and ISIS, why is this a bad thing? And it basically shows that the U.S. government has been backed into a hideous propaganda corner. Because for years, the U.S. government has justified everything they did on the basis of Al-Qaeda terrorists and then later ISIS terrorists. Emmanuel Goldstein. And it's a complete fraud. Right now, we are seeing this generation's equivalent of the lie about a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor blowing up the USS Maine, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin after the USS Maddox, the lie about the Lusitanian not carrying weapons, the lie that Pearl Harbor was a complete surprise. It's another gigantic hoax perpetrated on you, the American people, by the U.S. government to get us to go along with wars of conquest and empire. The surrender of our Bill of Rights, increased confiscation of our money, less control over our lives, constant government surveillance. And it's all based on a lie. Now, over in Syria, without the constant U.S. bombings going on, supposedly against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but, gee, we accidentally hit some of the good guys. We're sorry. We promise we won't do it again. The Syrian army, now protected overhead by the Russian Air Force, is storming East Aleppo and northern Homs. They are just regaining vast swaths of territory. And the hired mercenaries playing at I'm a terrorist are skedaddling for the most part for the border. Russia has hit over 100 ISIS targets so far in Syria, accomplishing in a little less than 2 weeks far more than the United States was able to do in a year of the so-called war on ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the videos that are coming out are absolutely demonstrating the performance of the Russian weapons over Syria. And it basically just brings a question. If the U.S. wasn't actually bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and Iraq for this last year, what have they been bombing? Well, we know they bombed things like grain silos and refineries and pipelines and critical economic infrastructure of Syria's government. But there's another thing going on here you might want to think about. If you're my age and you remember the war in Vietnam, you probably remember the phrase suspected truck park from anybody who was flying any air missions over Vietnam, where these air missions were dispatched day after day after day after day to coordinates on a map. Bombs were dropped, and it always turned out all they destroyed was empty jungle. And looking back, it came out that the real agenda was simply grinding up military supplies in order to justify more military spending, more money taken away from the American people to enrich the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned us they were going to do during his farewell address. This looks like more of the same. They don't want to win the war in Syria or Iraq for the same reason they don't want to cure diseases. There's more money to be made just letting the situation go on and on and on and appearing to treat the symptoms. That's what's going on. Now, the Syrian Army has begun a massive offensive against the terrorists after the Russian Air Force airstrikes. And Russia is asking a valid question, same one I just did. What are the U.S. and allies bombing? In a year of bombing, both in Syria and Iraq, they haven't hit anything. ISIS kept growing and growing and getting more weapons and becoming more powerful. What was the U.S. actually bombing here? Russian member of parliament has basically come out and said, look, it looks like the U.S. spent an entire year bombing empty desert and calling it a war on ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We posted one flashback story about U.S. jets bombing grain silos in Syria, killing civilians. They were bombing the food supply. And that's a war crime, by the way. Now, the Syrian army has announced they have shot down a spy drone over Latakia. And obviously giving intelligence to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And here comes the next question. Is the U.S. government giving the terrorists spy drones? See, that's the real sticking point for the U.S. government that they're trying to find a way around. The U.S. has been denouncing other nations, especially Iran, as state sponsors of terror without any real evidence. It's always an anonymous source who can't discuss it because it's under investigation, blah, 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 blah. And here we have the United States caught red-handed, arming, funding, training, equipping ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The U.S. is the state sponsor of terror. And they're not alone. Saudi Arabia has increased arms supplies to 3 Syrian terrorist fronts. And by the way, Saudi Arabia has no more legal grounds to be interfering with Syria than the United States. There's no United Nations resolution condemning the Assad government and saying it has to be replaced. This is all on the U.S. and their allies. We don't like Assad. He won't do what we tell him to do, therefore we have to get rid of him. That's generally the agenda everywhere. If you won't run your country the way we tell you to, if you won't be part of the New World Order, we will make war on you. And all of this is a violation of international law and the UN Charter. But all these people supporting the New World Order, they serve a higher purpose. We have a noble cause to bring the entire earth under a single benevolent global government and a single benevolent private central bank. Other media around the world are out there just saying, Russia to the rescue. Russia has proven they can get into Syria. They're getting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And all the United States government can do right now is thrash around in rage that they can't do anything about it. Russia has made the U.S. look at the very least totally impotent militarily, and at the worst exposed that the entire war on terror has been a gigantic fraud perpetrated against the American people and the rest of the world. Now, John McCain actually came out with a comment on a recent interview talking about Russia is bombing CIA's rebels. He's admitting what's going on in Syria. They're all working for the United States. We'll be right back. We had to clear out a few Skype problems during the break here, and my server was actually under attack just before the show, but we're getting all this stuff sorted out. And also, I've noticed, I'm going out on the corporate media to every place talking about Hillary's email server, and I'm posting the question. Was the combination of a weakened email server holding U.S. government secrets coupled with a charitable foundation a mechanism for Hillary to repeat the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling U.S. secrets for donations. And it's a legitimate, valid question. There's no reason not to be asking it. There's no reason for the government and the corporate media not to be asking it. But I've noticed there is this small cadre of people following me around from corporate media site to corporate media site, desperate to leap on and shout, "You're a liar! You hate women! You must be a Tea Party member! You must be this!" And it's almost getting funny. And other people in these comment sections are starting to pick up on it and say, you know, you're contributing nothing but noise. Go away. And I need all of you Rivero's Rangers to do this. If enough people start asking this question, sooner or later, the corporate media will have to pay attention. And once the corporate media pays attention, the government will have to pay attention. So, anyway, getting on back to stuff here. NATO is vowing the biggest build-up against Russia since the Cold War. We're going to take all your money away, and we're going to build new bombs and planes and rockets, and you don't need schools or hospitals or roads or plumbing or anything. Everything has to go into the war machine. But remember, despite all this announcement that NATO is the one doing the military build-up and the NATO nations are being driven into poverty to pay for it all, remember, this is all Russia's fault. Russia, and they're doing it because they hate us for our freedoms, blah, 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 blah. Now, on a more serious note, if you are my age, and you have my deepest sympathies if you are, you will remember that the original Cold War was a gigantic fraud by the military-industrial complex, and Eisenhower warned us about it during his farewell address. Just taking huge amounts of money from the American people to build weapons that did well in the demonstrations, but they knew they were never really going to use them. So they buy them and stockpile them, or they buy them and give them to Israel, or they buy them and just let them corrode away at that giant aircraft facility out in the Arizona desert. Have you ever looked at that thing through Google Earth? It's an amazing amount of all these old Cold War aircraft just corroding into junk out there in Arizona, and every one of them was paid for by your tax dollars, and your parents' tax dollars, and your grandparents' tax dollars. Money that could have gone to something better, like better schools, better hospitals, paying down the national debt. And instead, all that money was wasted. They could have just as well taken that money, built a big, huge pile of it, and set it on fire for all the good that money did. And they're trying to play the same scam again. But you know, fool me once. We understand what the mechanism is now. It's all about money. It's all about huge fortunes. It's all about the Pentagon Wars, and we've got to have bigger weapons than they do. Now, the latest development is, it looks more and more like China is going to come into Syria with Russia, and again at the invitation of the Syrian government, to get rid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And once ISIS and Al-Qaeda are gone in Syria, looks like they're going to go into Iraq. And once ISIS and Al-Qaeda are really gone, the U.S. agenda, the war on terror, collapses. The terrorists are gone. Russia actually won the war on terror. And so we need our Bill of Rights back. We need the TSA to stop groping our crotches, stealing from our luggage. We need the NSA to stop spying on us. If the war on terror is gone, we don't need to put up with any more of that nonsense, do we? Now, earlier in the week, there was the story that was out there about how ISIS was planning a nuclear bomb, and ISIS was going to do this, and ISIS was going to steal socks out of your dryer, and ISIS was going to pass wind in the elevator, and the same stuff we've been getting all along. And it came out of Associated Press, and it turned out the entire thing came out of an FBI sting that caught some smugglers carrying some radioactive material. And here's the part that is really interesting. Nobody connected with ISIS was anywhere near any of this stuff. They made it up out of thin air. Ooh, we got some smugglers. They might have been willing to sell to ISIS. There's the story. ISIS is coming to bomb the United States of America. And again, no, ISIS is not coming to bomb the United States of America. ISIS is hanging on by their fingernails in Syria and Iraq. They're not going to come and give the U.S. government a means to get the American people to go on in there and join side by side with Russia and China and Syria and finish them off. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are desperate for the U.S. government to send them more weapons. The only reason ISIS would set off a nuclear weapon in the United States is if Obama says, look, somebody from ISIS has to set this off so that we can regain the propaganda initiative. And as long as they know, we know that's the likely possibility. Hopefully we can deter them from doing that. Now, unable to get around the fact that Russia's presence in Syria is perfectly legal under international law, the U.S. is trying to find some other way to regain the propaganda initiative. And I think it's typified by this story that came out of the BBC, which stands for Buggering British Children, the news network that reported the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 26 minutes before it actually happened. They're out there saying that Russia's Syrian bombing is helping Iran. It's emboldening Iran to just do what Iran wants to do because Iran is learning that America's military is impotent and we can't let that happen. So the spin is Russia's helping of Assad against ISIS. It's going to somehow aid Iran's rush towards a nuclear bomb that will blow us all to heck, blah, 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 blah. And because we are all expected to hate Iran like the loyal the loyal American citizens we are, this will cause us to overlook the fact that it is the United States and not Russia that is the aggressor, not just in Syria, but in Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Ukraine, Sudan, on and on and on and on. So, now, yesterday, CNN reported, based on an anonymous Pentagon source, that some of the cruise missiles fired by Russia from the Caspian Sea into Syria had fallen on Iran. And both Moscow and Iran are saying, no, didn't happen. And, of course, what we're getting from CNN and the U.S. government is, trust us. You have to trust us, really. No, we don't. More when we come back from these commercials. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this story that came out earlier in the week based on a single anonymous source in the Pentagon that some of the cruise missiles launched by Russia from the Caspian Sea had fallen on Iran on their way into Syria. And at this point, I actually need to get a smaller egg timer because the lifespan of these lies is getting less and less as time goes on. Former U.S. Senate candidate Mark Dankoff said, obviously, this is a psyop, and this isn't real. For one thing, there was no way the U.S. could know, right? And around the Internet, we saw stories basically saying, show us proof or it didn't happen. Nobody is buying these stories by the U.S. government anymore. So why did the U.S. government do it? Well, there's one immediate explanation. We are seeing all these videos of all these Russian weapons in actual combat conditions in Syria performing brilliantly. In contrast with ongoing reports about the failures of America's weapons, which are hideously expensive. F-22 still asphyxiating its pilots. F-35, the list of problems with that is just amazing, including the most recently announced one. The ejection system will break the neck of the pilot. And so America's defense contractors are in a panic. Everybody around the world is going to want to buy Russian weapons, because Russia accomplished in less than 2 weeks with their weapons what the U.S. couldn't do in a year with the U.S. weapons. That's a real bad recommendation. The U.S. defense industries are probably feeling as beat up as Volkswagen right about now. So military sales and protecting that's definitely one of the agendas. And I know it's definitely an agenda because when I've been commenting on the corporate media websites about the disparity between the Russian and American weapons, there's a whole new gaggle of these obvious shills following me around. No, American weapons are clearly superior, and the reason is the F-35's got this. And you can tell they're literally copying the sales brochure into their post. The F-35 has a new DX7 27.6 holographic display that can... So they're very, very worried. Now, that's one very real reason to try and discredit the capability of the Russian weapons. Another possibility suggested by a listener is that maybe somebody's getting ready to bomb Iran and wants to be able to blame it on Russia. Now, Russia has responded to all this nonsense in a typical Russian fashion. They've said every target that a cruise missile was aimed at was destroyed. So the only way the U.S. could be telling the truth about some of our cruise missiles landing in Iran is if some of these ISIS targets just spontaneously combusted all by themselves. All right, let's grab some phone calls here. We're going to go with DJ in Georgia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. And I want to add something to that last comment you said. And from what I understood, all the Russian missiles have the high definition cameras, and they take their target hit. So had there been a fallout or something missed, there would have been the video to prove it and all this stuff. But I'm sure it's just another example of just how propaganda, how much propaganda there is out there and how propagandized the
well, let's back up here a little bit. First of all, I am not aware that the Russian, or for that matter, even the American cruise missiles have any kind of a video camera, primarily because having enough power to send something back before the missile is destroyed would add a lot of unnecessary weight to the frame. The videos that you see going into a target are from bombs and missiles that are guided by the television system. And they're sending the information back to the launching platform. It's much more short range, and they can do that. That being said, if there was some kind of a video feed from the Russian cruise missiles and one of them hit the wrong target, let's be honest, Russia's not going to release that. But again, this story, there was no substance to it. It was just the usual Pentagon anonymous source, and we're supposed to take that at face value. And of course, we're not going to take that at face value. Not coming from the Pentagon. Not coming from the corporate media. These are all the people who told us Saddam had nuclear weapons, for crying out loud. We shouldn't be listening to them anymore.
Pretty much. I'd have to agree. It's just more propaganda. The one other comment I want to make is yesterday you brought up how the drug companies weren't interested in, coming up with cures and all of this stuff, which I happen to agree because, even these non-profit groups that are raising awareness and, they do all these big fundraisers, all that money that a lot of people might not be aware of this, but all the money that they're raising doesn't go into research and development. It just goes into payment plans for people who can't afford the medicine. So all these groups that they're raising the money for, they do a good job with it, as in helping poor people buy the medicines, but it's not going into research.
That's used to counter any pressure to lower the drug prices overall for everyone. And so one way or the other, whether you're paying for your prescription or you're donating to these agencies, you're still paying for these high-priced drugs that don't need to be that high-priced. It's all money and gouging. And no, the health industry doesn't want you healthy. They want you to stay as sick as long as you can to make the most money off of you. Same thing going on with all these U.S. wars. They want them to prolong as long as possible because the military-industrial complex gets more money for it.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know how, with all these war crimes and all these, just blatant acts that the government's doing, I don't see how people think that this country's going to be around for that much longer. It seems like a lot of people are just trying to say, hey, look, how can all this stuff go unchecked? And right now, I think because the U.S. is the superpower, they think they're the superpower. They think no one's going to. I was just going to
say, I think Russia has just put that particular designation in doubt right now. Here's what's going on. All these things go on because we have been relying on government to regulate and control itself, because that's the way it was originally set up. It isn't doing it. This country will go on. We may see a complete change of governmental systems, as happened with the former Soviet Union. And I would certainly like to see that come on about. But we reached the point where the lies have become so bold and so plentiful I think it's time for Americans to simply tune out anything the government or the corporate media is saying. Just don't even listen anymore. Don't do as you're told. Don't fill out the little paperwork. Just ignore them, and hopefully they'll go away. Okay?
All right, Mike. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to let you go, and we're going to start with John in Barbados. John, we're probably going to have to take you through the commercial break, but what's on your mind?
Okay, Michael. Yeah, hello. Well, I'm looking at this situation. NATO is apparently going to be putting troops into Turkey to help them with their Russian problem. I don't think it's the Russian problem.
It isn't the Russian problem. Turkey and Russia have already cleared up that idea, where a Russian plane went along the border and nobody was really sure where the line was. NATO is putting troops into Turkey to launch a ground invasion into Syria. And that's the only reason for them to be there. Nobody seriously thinks Russia is going to invade Turkey. It's not going to happen.
No, I don't think NATO is going to invade Syria either. What I think they're putting them in there is all these very angry takfiris who feel that they've been let down by their bosses, the CIA and the Pentagon, are going to be really, really peeved that when they go over that border into Turkey and into Jordan. I think that's why they're putting these extra troops there.
Well, that would be more suited to a United Nations peacekeeping force. NATO forces, aren't there for civilian crowd control. They're there to invade somebody. And right now, from the point of view of the United States, they have to take Syria or they can't take Iran. And if they don't take Syria and Iran, the whole petrodollar war to dollarifize the Middle East falls apart and collapses. That's the problem. John, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. We got a lot of stuff to cover, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And if you are going down to the regular old post office and gambling on whether the package you're sending through California's Richmond facility ever actually reaches its destination, you will probably notice that the Selective Service registration forms are out there on display. Little cardboard sign, little pamphlet reminding everybody that if you're between the ages of 18 and 25, you must register with Selective Service because they may have to bring back the draft to deal with Russian aggression. Well, I'll tell you what, for those of you who go to the post office, grab a handful of those things and then mail them off to your favorite members of Congress and your favorite talking heads at the media. We need to start sending them a message. If they're all hot and bothered for a war, they should go first. Let's put them out on the front lines. This lead from behind stuff doesn't work. And by the way, apparently a senior Iranian general was leading from the front and got killed in Syria. And I think the world would be very wise to go back to the old model of war, where the person who wanted the war led their own troops, whether it was Alexander the Great or Napoleon or people like that, as opposed to our current model where we have a bunch of people who are cowering in bunkers underneath Washington, D.C., sending out your kids to do their killing for them and calling it glory and honor and fame and a bunch of other real nonsensical ideas. Alrighty. Now, there's another aspect to this that maybe NATO ought to be thinking about before they go on in to Syria, to oppose Russia's aggression, because if you really think about it carefully, especially looking at the immigration problem, the refugee problem that Europe is dealing with now, and it's being promoted and supported by the New World Orderists and pretty much opposed by everybody else. But do you ever stop to think, if ISIS and Al-Qaeda are these horrible terrorist threats, and if we are to believe all of these videos coming out of Rita Katz site intelligence about how ISIS is coming to kill us all, then isn't Russia actually saving Europe and the United States by killing ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and Iraq? You can't have it both ways. You can't be scaring us out of our tax money and the lives of our children by saying ISIS and Al-Qaeda are coming for us, and then when Russia actually goes in and starts killing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, saying, no, wait, you can't do that. It underscores it's all a gigantic fraud. The government is laughing at you for how you keep falling for these huge hoaxes time and time again. But you think about it. If Russia is killing ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and Iraq, there's far less of them to come here to the United States, isn't there? They're certainly not going to go to Russia, though. Russia really can take care of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The U.S. can't. And that is another reason why everybody in NATO and the Pentagon are thumping their chests and screaming and polishing their swords and the rest of it. Right now, they're looking pretty limp compared to Russia. And yes, part of it was the prolonging of these conflicts to maximize profits to the military-industrial complex, but to the rest of the world, it's very simple. U.S. weapons for a year didn't accomplish anything. Russian weapons in a little less than 2 weeks pretty much cleaned up the problem. Gee, I wonder whose weapons we're going to buy. Now, Ashton Carter has come out announcing that the U.S. is going to end the Syrian rebel training program because they spent something like $500 million, trained 45 rebels, most of whom promptly deserted to the other side. And so Ashton Carter has announced, we're going to work with the Kurds. We're going to go in and support the Kurds to overthrow the people we want to overthrow. I'm half expecting the Kurds to call up and say, look, based on your recent track record of success, we're going to pass on this one. We don't need to get tangled up with losers. And finally, of course, U.S. officials, because of all the attention focused on this on the independent media, they're starting to ask Toyota just how ISIS got hundreds of its trucks. And Toyota is hemming and hawing because it isn't Toyota who delivered those trucks to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The indications are those Toyotas went through the same path as all the guns from Libya, meaning the United States State Department. And that is a real big scandal that nobody in the government wants to come out. The war on terror is a fake. ISIS and Al-Qaeda were manufactured phony enemies to scare you into consent and complicity and agreement with the use of torture, invading other people's countries. We have to torture people. The ISIS and Al-Qaeda will get us if we don't let our government torture people to death to find nuclear weapons that never existed. I know it doesn't make sense, but I'm afraid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and I will go along with everything. And then you find out ISIS and Al-Qaeda are kind of like the giant flaming head of the Wizard of Oz, just papier-mâché and alcohol to scare Dorothy into going head-to-head with the Wicked Witch of the West, which is a stupid thing, because Kansas farm girls are no match for wicked witches. The wicked witches have got air superiority. And L. Frank Baum was just amazingly prescient in showing how government operates in a way that got past the government censors in his day and age. You really, if you have the time, you should read the original books. The movie stripped out all of the political content. The books are brilliant. Okay, let's see. We have, coming up here on the top of the hour, the U.S. continues to stonewall the investigation into the bombing of the hospital up in Afghanistan. The corporate media is still out there trying to say the Taliban were right nearby. They were in the adjacent building shooting. And yet, if you go to Google Earth and you look at that hospital, it's sitting all by itself in an empty space of farm fields and gardens. By the way, Doctors Without Borders is saying there are 33 people still unaccounted for following that airstrike on the Kunduz hospital. So it looks like the body count is going to go up even more. Article out of Sputnik News. Why is the U.S. so afraid of a probe into an accidental Kunduz hospital attack? Because maybe the U.S. violated international law, and they don't want to own up to it. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call before the top of the hour. Larry in Minnesota, aloha. Welcome to your show. What's on your mind? Welcome to my show. What's on your mind? I'm tired. More coffee.
I totally understand. Look, I'm just calling to succinctly thank you, Michael, for your tremendous work. I am your age. My name is Larry Pinckney.
You have my deepest sympathies, sir.
We will muddle through this.
Yes.
We will indeed. But your analysis, I think, is fantastic. It's poignant. It's right on point. And I think that the points that you have made, particularly with respect to the half-hearted attempts of the U.S., and I do say half-hearted, attempts of the U.S. to supposedly degrade and destroy ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, etc. I love the way that you're making it crystal clear. I think the more that people understand this and see this, they'll understand that who the enemy is, as far as the United States government is concerned, is we the people,
yes.
we the American people, black, white, brown, red, yellow people in this country. We are the enemies, if you will, from the perspective of the U.S. government. So I won't go on and on.
Because we won't do what we're told. That's why the U.S. government now
right.
sees us as enemies. We won't do what we're told to do. And by the way, the reason we spend so much time on some of these older deceptions like the Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, USS Maine, and the rest of it, we need to get Americans to understand and accept as a fact that, yes, the government does lie to the people on such a monumental scale. And because that makes it easier for them to look around them right now and say, the government is doing it again with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the war on terror.
Absolutely. Let me just say, let's also remember the USS Liberty and what
yes.
our government did and continues to lie about. But again, I'm going to get off and let you get on with your business. Michael, thank you very, very much. Stay strong.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, and we got to take a break for our top of the hour news and our commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Couple of interesting developments going on regarding Syria just now coming in here. Business Insider is reporting that the Free Syria Army is being given TOW missiles by Saudi Arabia to use against Assad's forces and potentially against ISIS. Apparently the CIA is also providing these American-manufactured, you got to pay for them, high-end weapons. So they're still pouring the weapons in there. It may turn out that the CIA is once again in violation of the Boland Act, because we are hearing reports coming out of a couple of different sources now, including Bloomberg, that Obama's top advisors are now telling him it's time to call it quits in Syria and just give up on this idea of forcing Assad out. It's just going to make the refugee problem worse. Going to spend a lot of money, get a lot of people killed. Victory is far from certain with Russia now in there. And remember, yesterday we reported on Obama's issuing a comment that strategic patience was the new policy regarding Syria. So sanity may have finally broken out there in Sodom on the Potomac. That would be a really, really good thing. Now, turning on down to Israel, where quite the contrary is in progress. I want to start out by reminding everybody that yesterday it was reported, they'd gotten it on video, that IDF forces were disguising themselves as Palestinian demonstrators, throwing rocks, trying to encourage other people to violence in order to justify the IDF coming in and using tear gas, tasers, live ammunition on the Palestinians. In one case, they showed an IDF person shooting a Palestinian protester in the leg at point-blank range. And the Palestinian was already on the ground. Other soldiers were punching and kicking him, and somebody just walks up and shoots him. Now, you're not supposed to shoot somebody when they're already in the ground under control. But Israel does that a lot here. Meanwhile, more than 1,000 clash with Israeli forces in Shufat refugee camp. Netanyahu is promising to crack down on all the violence. Netanyahu is causing all the violence. The intrusions into Al-Aqsa, these undercover operatives setting up the violence. This is classic Israeli by way of deception. cause an incident, blame it on the other guy, go on in and do what you want to do. Now, apparently a video has gone viral around the world showing the Israeli police just shooting a Palestinian woman execution style. Somebody got it on their little cell phone. It went viral. And the woman had surrendered. Her hands were in the air. And she was gunned down by the Israeli police. Another video has surfaced showing Israeli soldiers protecting the illegal settlers while they're attacking the Palestinians. While they're hurling stones at the Palestinians and setting fire to their olive groves. That's always a target of the settlers because it takes 10 years to grow an olive tree to the point where it produces a usable crop. Now, Howard Stern, who I haven't listened to since I entered puberty, I think, is using his popular radio show to call for Israel to wipe Palestinians off the face of the earth. He said that on the air. No hue and cry from the corporate media. When Memory came up with that bogus translation of Ahmadinejad saying, I'm going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, which he didn't actually say, oh, it was horrible all over. How that beast calling for genocide. And here we have Howard Stern calling for genocide in the American corporate media, and the American corporate media is kind of, yeah, all right, sure, why not? Because remember, genocide and war crimes are bad only when done against Israel. Anybody else is fair game. And the more obvious they become in their hypocrisy and double standard, the faster and faster their decline. This idea that this one select group of people have special rights and privileges over everybody else is out of place in the 21st century. Be perfectly at home back in the 14th, 15th century, the age of nobility where I'm a nobleman, I can kill you and you can't do anything about it. We're not going back there. The concept of the United States of America from day one was to be a nation of laws. And these laws would apply equally to everybody in the country, from the guy sweeping the floor or laying the bricks all the way up to and including the president himself. That was the beauty of the dream of the United States of America. And we have reached a point now where there's different classes of people. There's the money junkies and the bankers. We can't touch them. There's Israel. They are above the law. And everybody else is fair game. All right, let's talk about the economy a little bit. Current estimates are that 200,000 British households will fall below the poverty line by 2020. Their economy is in as much trouble as everybody else. Why? Because everybody has to give up their money to please the money junkies, to pay the private central bankers. Now, in Great Britain, the Bank of England has been nationalized after the Bretton Woods deal, and the pound sterling was no longer the global trade and banking currency. The Bank of England got into so much trouble so quickly they had to be nationalized to keep them from collapsing entirely. But Great Britain, tangled up with the European Union, is still following that private central banking model coming down from the European Central Bank. Now, the European Central Bank is not too comfortable right now because there are massive protests in Brussels, the heart of the European Union. Massive anti-austerity protests, and the police are out there with water cannons and tear gas. They're trying to beat these people down. How dare you not want to live out your life in debt slavery to the private central bankers? Do you not understand that these private central bankers are gods incarnate, and you owe them your wealth, and if necessary, your children in war? And I'm looking at this article over in Investment Watch Block saying, why aren't Americans protesting? Well, you know, we did for a while, Occupy Wall Street, and we got water cannoned and tear gassed and infiltrated and smeared by the media. And the enthusiasm for the protests began to wane when everybody finally realized the U.S. government isn't listening. They could care less what you are thinking. To the U.S. government, you are nothing but walking wallets and breeders of workers and soldiers. And that's it. That's it. You are livestock. And they treat you like that. That's not a metaphor. They treat you like you are livestock. They will tell you what you're going to eat, what you're not allowed to eat. like those Michelle Obama lunches. They're going to tell you what medicines you must take. You must have these vaccines. You may not take these other alternative medications. We're going to tell you where to live. We're going to watch everything you do. They're treating us like their property. I'm nobody's property. Except for Claire. She's the exception. But it's a valid question. Why aren't we protesting? And we don't need to go on out and have big riots in the streets, and I would advise against it. But there are quiet ways to have protests. Non-cooperation. Worked for Gandhi. Getting Great Britain out of India. Just calm, non-violent, non-cooperation. Just ignore them. Don't do what they want you to do. Just go your own way. Say, leave me alone. I'm not part of this process anymore. And I think we need to send a message to the rest of the world that the American people are not part of these wars of conquest coming out of Washington, D.C. I don't want our grandchildren to bear that stain. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. We're talking about the economy. And while the Trans-Pacific Partnership has been agreed to by all negotiators, but yet to be ratified by the participating countries, over on the other side, its counterpart, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, has run into some serious, serious trouble. Now, both of these treaties together appear to be designed to bring the earth underneath corporate rule. If you've ever seen the movie Rollerball, the original one with James Caan, where there is no more civil government, it is merely corporations ruling sections of the earth and constantly warring with each other and totally in control of your lives. It's a brilliant movie, too. Now, over in Europe, as we reported earlier in the week, there have been mass protests in the European Union. Huge. Millions of people signing petitions. Basically telling the members of the European Parliament, if you go along with this, we're going to vote you out next time. And as a result, it looks like the TTIP negotiations have pretty much fallen apart. And Britain's Prime Minister David Cameron is out there screaming about how dare you refuse corporate rule. And he's basically saying anybody who opposes this trade deal, which is giving away national sovereignty to corporate interests, he's accusing them of conspiracy theory and making up horror stories about the agreement. They're trying to poison the pact. And if you can't trust the British Prime Minister, then never mind. Here's the issue. The reason there is so much concern is twofold. One, both of these treaties have been negotiated completely in secret. The attitude displayed by the people behind these two treaties is, you don't need to know. We're going to decide what the world is going to do, and you have nothing to say about it. And that, of course, is an insult and affront to the very idea of democracy. Second, because of all the recent scandals about GMO and vaccines and corruption, the secrecy surrounding both these treaties is in and of itself a cause for concern. If this treaty is really a good thing for us, who are expected to live under its rules, why are we not allowed to see it? So, these are far from being done. And I do not see a planet Earth under corporate rule as being a very good place to live. Because corporate rule is very much like theocratic rule. They're completely disconnected from the needs and wants of the civil population. In the nation state, even a badly run nation state, the leadership to some extent has to pay attention to what the people want or need. In a theocratic state, they can abuse the people all they want because they serve the will of God. And likewise, in the corporate state, any abuses of the population are justified on the basis we have to serve the stockholders, the owners. We have to serve the money. By the way, I reposted a video I made a while back for this conference on robotics about how, in a very real way, our world is already being ruled by computers. It's a staple of science fiction. Computers ruling the world. Skynet has taken over. Well, Skynet is fiction. But if you really think about it, the global economic system is under the day-to-day, minute-to-minute, second-to-second control of these giant global network computer systems who have only one prime directive in their software: extract more wealth from the population. All other considerations do not exist. And they run the world economy, and because the world economy controls our lives to such an extent, those computers are running our lives right now, which is why we're getting poor quality products that fall apart, dangerous drugs, unhealthy food, toxic chemicals, because they're profitable. And if they're profitable, that's where it will go. Now, is this global computer system conscious and aware and sentient? No, it isn't. It's actually functioning pretty much on the level of a slime mold. But if you see time-lapse photos of how slime molds progress and grow and feed, you're amazed how something that simple can come up with such complex structures to keep itself fed. But that's where we are. Now, the people who own these banking computers may think they're the rulers of the world. They're not. They don't understand what's going on inside those machines. They're just along for the ride. Alrighty. Now, let's see. Saudi Arabia has had to order spending curbs because of the economic harm with the oil price slump. And this is a classic case of doing the will of the United States and having it blow back in your face. Because the reason for the oil price slump was the U.S. said, let's flood the world market with oil. The price of oil will drop, and Russia's economy, which is heavily dependent on oil exports, will be destroyed. And it wasn't. Russia suffered some economic harm, but a lot of other countries suffered far worse harm, including U.S. oil companies, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Venezuela. And so Saudi Arabia is now paying the price for being a U.S. puppet. Just the way France paid the price for being a U.S. puppet over that Mistral sale, which resulted in other countries dropping orders for French warplanes and going with Russia's. Now, we're seeing an article here over an Investment Watch blog. The silver shortage, physical silver, will destroy the paper price within a year. See, the way that the money junkies keep the price of silver and gold down to discourage you from emptying your savings account or liquidating your stock portfolio and getting into metals, is they blend the price of physical with the price of the paper contracts. And all they need to do to keep the price of silver and gold down is crank out more of those paper contracts. But they're now leveraged an insane amount, well over 100 paper ounces of coin for 1 real ounce of the metal involved. That is absolutely insane amounts of leveraging. And now people are trying to get into physical. They're willing to pay a premium of up to 50% over the spot price to get the physical instead of paper. And we're reaching a point where all these people who sold the paper contracts, they're going to hear pounding on their door, saying, I am holding a contract from you that you will deliver this much physical metal to me on this date. Where is it? Seeing an article here, the domestic warehouses, the bullion banks, the depositories are bleeding out bullion. And apparently gold is held in any reasonable amount now only in 2 locations, Scotia, Mokata, and HSBC. They can't keep it going forever. At some point, if Obama gets your guns, I guarantee he's going to order you to turn in all your silver, gold, platinum, tantalum, palladium. For the good of the banks. Because Roosevelt did it in 1933. The gold. Roosevelt didn't do tantalum. We'll be right back after these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And have you ever noticed this really bizarre phenomenon that every time the gun grabbers start working on their agenda, all of a sudden there's a surge in the number of shooting incidents for the gun grabbers to wag at you? And today is no exception. We've had 2 college shooting incidents. We had one in North Arizona University. One student was killed, 3 others wounded. This one appears to have been a physical confrontation that got out of hand, and yes, somebody had a gun and pulled it and used it. No report on whether the guy was on prescription antidepressants or not. The second shooting took place down at Texas Southern University in Houston, and apparently seems to have been some kind of a confrontation involving a fraternity. Now, setting aside the issue of prescription psychiatric medications, we have to ask ourselves what makes kids so ready to use violence. Well, look at the example being set by the United States government. The U.S. government has now for 12 years, actually before that, but especially for the last 12 years, exhibited a very simple message. You don't like somebody, you shoot them. They won't do what you want, you shoot them. They won't give you their money, you shoot them. Now, governments are supposed to lead by example, and our government certainly does. And the constant warmongering and violence and the use of torture and the murdering of millions of people who have done no wrong to this country is going to send a message to impressionable young minds that this is an acceptable kind of behavior. And with economics keeping both parents working, and Common Core and TV shows, their socialization, there's no countering force to say, you know, it's just not the way you should be. And, of course, the gun grabbers are out there saying, oh, pay no attention to the prescription psychiatric medication. You know, it's the guns are to blame. We've got to ban all the guns. And, again, you need to understand. What they want to do is take away guns from law-abiding American citizens on the basis of actions carried out by some very bad individuals who may be drugged out of their mind. When somebody goes out drunk driving, runs up on the sidewalk and runs down a bunch of Boy Scouts, they don't demand the rest of us turn in our cars, do they? Of course not. Only with the guns. Somebody sent me a cool joke earlier today. The difference between the National Rifle Association and Planned Parenthood, you will walk out of the National Rifle Association alive. So, good little point there. But the gun grabbers are really out there. And yeah, every time the gun grabbers get on their high horse, for some strange reason, the number of shootings cranks up. Weird how that happens. No gun grab in history has ever gotten all the weapons. No gun grab in history has ever disarmed the criminals. This idea that banning all guns in this country so that the U.S. government can send them down to the Mexican drug cartels or to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the rest of the world, it really won't work. Because somebody who is of a mind to do so can make a gun. If you know woodwork, metalwork, can use a lathe, know a little bit of chemistry, you can make a gun. And if you have a homemade gun in a city where nobody is armed at all, you have the advantage. You can go on out, commit crimes, even shoot somebody, because they can't shoot back, even with a primitive weapon. So it's just unrealistic. Now, back when the United States was out there claiming to be the world's supreme nuclear power, and they were, and then the Russians got hold of the secret, the U.S. didn't try and ban nuclear weapons all around the world because they were dangerous, and they are. Nuclear weapons have no other purpose than to destroy other people's cities. That's it. Guns can be used for hunting, putting food on the table, protecting your home, putting holes in paper, which is actually quite relaxing. Nuclear bombs, you don't do that. They do one thing. They destroy other cities. But nobody ever said, let's get rid of all the nuclear bombs inside the government or the military-industrial complex. The logic always was, if everybody has nuclear bombs, nobody will use them. Well, let's bring that down to the gun debate. If every American has guns, nobody will use them. Haven't you noticed all these mass shootings take place in the gun-free zones? We need to get rid of gun-free zones. We need zones with signs that say, there are guns here. You figure out who's carrying them. And the shootings will go down. So let's talk about Hillary Clinton's email server because bit by bit, it's getting worse and worse and worse for her. Apparently, some of the newly released emails involve the naming of a CIA source, which is being denounced as an unauthorized disclosure of classified information by CIA officials. And Gowdy is saying new emails are showing Sidney Blumenthal pushing Libya's interests, where he had financial interests, to Hillary Clinton and doing the naming. And what's really interesting, looking at this article coming out of Fox News, they're treating this new mail, which definitely contained classified information, as casting doubt on Hillary's claim that she never sent or received classified information on her private email address. Well, that claim was nonsense right from the beginning, and either Fox News is a willing part of Hillary's cover-up, or they're really mentally unfit over there, because of simple logic. The job of Secretary of State involves a great deal of classified information. Now, Hillary was not using her official government email system. And if she's claiming that she never sent or received classified information on her private server, then what server did she use for classified information? And why hasn't it been surrendered to the Benghazi investigation? Is there a third server out there? No, of course not. Hillary lied. And Fox News is tippy-toeing around it, saying it casts doubt on her testimony. We're past casting doubt. She lied, she lied, she lied, she lied. Now, it looks like all of the participants in this whole charade understand that the real deep, dark secrets behind all of this, the gun running of weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, which destroys the whole war on terror hoax, Hillary's possible selling of secrets in exchange for donations, are scandals that cannot come out. So right now, they're in the process of desperately scrabbling around trying to find the equivalent of the stained blue dress that they can all lure our attention away. And say, oh, there's a little tawdry sex scandal over here or something that they'll make a big deal about and then hope the whole thing goes away. We fell for that before. Most people fell for it before. We're not going to do that again. There are bigger issues behind Hillary's email server than what she was sharing with Sidney Blumenthal. Although there is an issue there. Sidney Blumenthal, and for that matter, Hillary's lawyer, Kendall, do not have the security clearances necessary to be shown anything that Hillary had that was classified. Yet Kendall had a thumb drive full of these classified emails, and Blumenthal apparently had access to this information as well. Espionage Act violations. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. We'll be back after these few words. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, if you're a movie buff, Robert Redford fan, you probably remember a movie that came out a while ago. I forget the exact dates. I think some were in the 70s and 80s. 3 Days of the Condor. And it's based on a book, The 7 Days of the Condor, but they shrunk it down for the sake of the movie. And it's basically about Robert Redford plays this employee for a CIA proprietary company. It's supposed to be a book club, but basically they scan through books, spy novels, adventure novels, looking for ideas that could be useful for a real intelligence operation. And then all of a sudden the whole thing is gunned down. And the story turns out that one of the top officials at the Central Intelligence Agency set up his own parallel outside spy shop. And Robert Redford and his people stumbled across it, and it had to be erased. Big stink, big cleanup. Now that's fiction. Real life caught up with it a little bit later during Iran-Contra, when it came out that what they were calling the enterprise, the gun running and the drugs, were not actually officially sanctioned policy. That's why they had to import drugs to pay for it all. They couldn't go to Congress and get any of this stuff. So with that history in mind, I'm looking at this story that's coming out of INFOWARS.com. And it's authored by Wayne Madsen. And they're pulling together a chain of evidence that is very compelling, that Hillary Clinton had her own separate, parallel, privatized State Department that she was running in concert with a private consulting firm that's tied closely to George Soros. And this parallel State Department was answerable only to Hillary Clinton and not President Obama. Now, if it turns out this parallel operation was behind the gun running from Libya to Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria, then Obama is off the hook. Hillary is not only guilty of treason, she's guilty of violating the Boland Act. Just because you're Secretary of State doesn't mean you can go off on your own. And for that matter, everybody tangled in with this second private State Department, if it really exists, if Wayne's got the goods here, everybody working, connected with it, is in violation of the Boland Act, conducting foreign policy on their own. So we need to keep looking at that. Just as I'm going to keep on looking at the email scandal. Now, there's also one more possibility, and that is that this is being put out there so that Obama can cut Hillary loose and dump the blame for everything on her. Let's not rule out that possibility. Judge Napolitano is out there warning everybody that should Hillary somehow become president of the United States, which is looking less and less likely as time goes on, that she will absolutely ignore all of the rulings by the United States Supreme Court regarding the Second Amendment. And she's going to go on back to the old canards about how the Second Amendment only applies to state-controlled militia. And by the way, if you look at the Common Core textbooks that are teaching the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that's what they say the Second Amendment is. They've rewritten it to say that you have a right to keep and bear arms when you are part of a state-controlled militia, which is not what the Second Amendment actually says. So Hillary's definitely a gun grabber. She must feel she has something to be afraid of. Now, there's another article coming out of Natural News, and it's worth looking at. Government democide and disarmament are greatest threats of violence. And it's basically pointing out an historical reality. Every time a government has decided to exterminate a segment of their population, it is preceded with a gun ban on that targeted population. And when the butchery is over, the death count from the government extermination is usually way orders of magnitude greater than what the crime might have been with an armed population. But then remember, the more a population is armed, the lower crime tends to be. Now, Obama is up there in Oregon. He's waving the bloody shirt. He's stumping around there trying to get some kind of support for gun grab and executive orders. We're going to mandate all of this other stuff. And he's met some protests up there. I was very alarmed because earlier somebody sent me this link to a website called akfiles.com that was calling for an armed demonstration in front of the president to basically send a message, you are not welcome here. Now, I don't have a problem with anybody who wants to tell the president, you're not welcome here. But this reeked of a COINTELPRO staged setup to make gun owners look really bad by threatening the President of the United States of America. We need to be very, very careful. I can smell the panic coming out of Washington, D.C. They're desperate and they're cornered, and that makes them more dangerous to the American people than they've ever been. Now, Ben Carson got caught up on a TV interview talking about the economy and the debt situation, and he got asked what the debt limit was, and apparently came off looking totally clueless, had no idea what it actually meant. Being interviewed by Kai Reisedal, and basically put on display Carson's lack of familiarity with the mechanism. You know, it is rather disconcerting how many of the political candidates we are offered year after year after year after year, they look really good in clothes. Look at all the clothes they bought for Sarah Palin. They smile pleasant, the TV's on there, but when you really get down to it, they don't know what's going on. And yesterday we had that story where people are saying that members of the government, Congress and the White House, have to have a basic science understanding before they're allowed to vote on anything of a scientific issue. I would argue the same thing has to go for any other aspect of government. These people ought to have a knowledge of economics, a knowledge of civil management, civil structures. We have a bunch of people who have no clue what's going on in the world, deciding how our country is going to head into the future. That's kind of scary here. Chris Christie is trying to recover his fading media presence here with a statement, "Put me in the ring against Vladimir Putin." He's puffing himself up here. And actually, it's a good idea. I'd pay money to see Chris Christie actually have to face Vladimir Putin. That would be fun. That would be worth it. That would be fun. As you know, the House of Representatives is in turmoil after McCarthy stepped down as the most likely new Speaker of the House. Boehner is saying he's going to stay on until this is all settled up, which means he could stay on until the end of the year at this point. We're hearing rumors Newt Gingrich might try and come back as Speaker of the House. And doesn't sound like progress to me, and since Newt's departure from the speakership, there's been a lot of stuff that's come out about him that I think would discourage people. All right, let's talk about this whole immigration situation. We're almost here at the top of the hour, but in brief, earlier in the week we reported on this No Borders activist who got raped by Sudanese immigrants, was told by her fellow activists, don't say anything, you're going to harm the cause. We're all here in service to a world without borders, the New World Order, and you're going to spoil it. And apparently it's not just that, because there's an article over in Sputnik News where German officials are deliberately hiding the crimes being committed by the refugees. So it looks like this, we're going to blend them all together so we can drop the borders plan, isn't going very well when they're having to do that kind of a situation. Over in Bavaria, which is the area around Munich, they're saying, we're just going to send these people back to Austria. We can't take them in. Austria is saying, if you try and send them back, there's going to be trouble at the border and there could be violence. They've created a huge mess. Forget about the out-of-control debt. Forget about the ECB. This refugee crisis could destroy the European Union. It's already ended the open borders within the European Union. They're putting up fences and checkpoints and everything again. It's all unraveling on them. Apparently over in Calais, a charity has stopped their funding because the refugees were burning the food and clothes because it wasn't what they wanted. Meanwhile, the World Bank is out there saying mass migration is good for the economy because we want a single global private central bank to make you all our slaves for eternity. We'll be back after the news with the lovely Lady Claire. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show right now. And before we go to the lovely Lady Claire back here, we're going to take a phone call that's been on hold since before the news. Francis in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Francis, are you there?
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to draw your attention here. I was looking at Webster Tarpley's website.
Hello?
And he's talking about Brzezinski's, Viktor Brzezinski's going insane. And he wants military action against the Russians in Syria because America's losing face. And it looks like he wants to flirt with nuclear war. And there's two good articles at Financial Times and Politico on this. And he says here, in these rapidly unfolding circumstances, the U.S. has only one real option if it is to protect its wider stakes in the region, to convey to Moscow the demand that it cease and desist from military actions that directly affect American assets.
Well, you know, all I can say is if you really feel that way, Zbigniew, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your jumpsuit. I mean, he's not actually part of the government any longer. He's kind of been put out to pasture. And you're right, it's insane, and a lot of people have called him on it, where he's out there talking about militarily breaking Russia into little tiny parts. It is simply not doable. And, you know, I think as we come to the realization that the U.S. war plan to conquer the world has stumbled and is about to fall, you're going to see all of the most ardent supporters of the Project for the New American Century. They're going to be out there screaming and crying and just trying to regain the momentum, but they've lost the initiative. This whole plan that PNAC had was supposed to be over in 2008. It's 2015, and we are sick and tired of the poverty, of dead children, of crippled children, and I am really sick and tired of all these old Cold War fossils who are dug up out of their graves, pumped full of some kind of chemical and put in front of the corporate media cameras for one more try at convincing us about how war is wonderful and gloriful. And again, if they think war is great, here are the rifles and parachutes. Go fight it yourself.
Yeah, and he thinks he's going to get China's just going to stand back this time and let Russia fall apart. Like, I don't think he sees that this is like China, Russia, and Iran are an axis now. They're not going to. That alliance. He's
been out of the loop. He's been out of the loop. He has not been sitting in on the meetings and briefings. He's not really paying attention. In fact, his entire rhetoric is coming out of the 1960s, 1970s.
Yeah. He's out of date. He thinks it's like the old Nixon running off to Peking to shake hands with the hands of Mao drenched in the blood of 70 million innocent people to try to stab the Russians from the rear, right? And that's over.
Yeah, he's out of his time. He's out of his time. Anyway, listen, Francis, thanks. I'm going to let you go. We're going to take... All right, we're going to take one more phone call from Frank in London, and then we're going to put the phones on hold so that Claire can have her turn. Frank, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I just was watching RT earlier on, and I saw the president of the EU stating that America should not be allowed to dictate what kind of relationship they should have with Russia. So I see there's some kind of pulling away going on.
Yes, there is. It's actually been starting to happen for quite some time, and I understand exactly where the European Union is coming from. They have paid a huge cost financially for going along with Washington, D.C.'s anti-Russia agenda, and also they're really seeing the U.S. is willing to start a whole new world war, and since the last two were fought on European soil, at least in part, they don't want to have to go through that again. And so, yeah, the international support for the U.S. agenda is crumbling.
Yeah, and I hope people like Brzezinski and McCain, they should spend more time, I don't know, cleaning their dentures or something.
Playing golf, perhaps. Playing golf.
Restarting their heart, get up and it's amazing. I mean, the corporate media loves these guys. I mean, they've had Charles Krauthammer out there. It doesn't even look like there's a living nerve anywhere in his face anymore. He's had so much Botox. And they put him out in front of the camera and he says, yeah, the wars are good, the wars are good. And Fox News says, yes, it's all falling apart. Anyway, listen, Frank, I got to let you go because I got this lovely lady behind me who deserves her term at the microphone. So thank you for the call. And we're going to put the call, we're going to shut down the phone lines for a little while at least here. And Claire, what do you want to talk about first?
Well, first is the economic news, which is not exactly thrilling. And apparently the IMF, the UN, the Bank of International Settlements, and Citibank are all warning that an economic crisis could very much be imminent. And it's a conversion of, it's a coming together of all of these opinions that are a little bit scary.
The convergence here.
Convergence.
It's that 11th marble.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what they're saying is that emerging market companies have overborrowed by $3 trillion with a T in the last decade, reflecting a quadrupling of private sector debt between 2004 and 2014. And that is from the IMF's Global Financial Stability Report.
Yeah, but you see what they're trying to do is they're already looking for a scapegoat. Yeah. When it crashes, whose fault is it? It's not ours. Yeah. It was the emerging markets. They're to blame. Yeah. And so the blame-shifting regatta is well and truly underway here. But we all know the cause for the economic crash. It's private central banks issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, a mechanism which by design produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt crashes the entire system. And that's where we are right now.
And Mike, I wanted to ask you, with all of this going on, and especially with the Central Reserve, Why is now the time that President Obama is demanding of Congress to raise the ceiling on the national debt? It just makes no sense.
Well, it does make sense when you realize that the U.S. government actually went past its legal debt ceiling about 4 or 5 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
More than that, actually, about 8 months ago, and now they're having to own up to it. The problem is that every time the government officially raises the debt ceiling and borrows up to and just past it,
mm-hmm.
it further destroys global confidence in the U.S. dollar, and they want to stop using the dollar, but at the same time you've got Obama and the Pentagon pointing guns and bombs at your country saying you will go on using the dollar or bad things will happen to you.
Right.
And but when everybody abandons the system all at once, what's the U.S. government going to do? Declare war on the entire planet? They're a little outgunned. And what Russia has told the world in these last almost 2 weeks, the U.S. military machine is not capable. Because Russia did in less than 2 weeks what the U.S. weapons and military couldn't accomplish in an entire year. Now, we know the real reasons for that. But for the vast majority of people who bought the official U.S. government story that we were in Syria to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they're looking at the performance and low cost of the Russian weapons, so are all other nations, and the U.S. has lost the illusion that it is the superior military power on the planet. Now, yes, the U.S. is still supreme in its nuclear arsenal, but I don't think anybody out there wants to find out on that one.
I would agree with you. And I'd like to go to another story about Monsanto.
Yes.
They're about to cut 2,600 jobs as GMO seed sales fall.
Oh, poor Monsanto.
You know, I'm sorry about the people who are losing their jobs, but I'm not sorry about the corporation because of their business practices and scientific
practices. I don't know.
Practices.
What if the people losing the job were the ones who created the GMO seeds? I'm not going to feel bad for them.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. But, I think that it's significant.
Yes.
And I think that there is a real possibility that both Monsanto and other companies of its kind like
Syngenta,
they're going to wind up getting sued out of existence.
Well, I'm sure the U.S. government will move to indemnify them.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is the world is turning against GMO. Russia's banned GMO. 2/3 of the European Union have banned GMO. The idea of banning GMO labeling that's in the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a major sticking point and may result in the whole TPP collapsing. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what is your next story?
Well, this, upon reading it, I had a very large palm-to-forehead moment at Velocity. Churches are paying the government up to $100 a month to spy on families. According to an Arizona Department of Child Safety document, churches are collaborating with social workers to spy on families, and they're also using child safety and risk assessments. According to the Tucson.com article, church leaders are openly encouraged to collaborate with the government, and then the article goes on to explain how religious organizations will spy on families and help the government decide whether they should remove a child from their family. This just stinks.
It really does. It really does, but I don't understand why the churches are paying the government. I have to be very honest. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like the headline might be an error because the church is clearly working for the government's Child Protective Services to spy on families.
Yeah.
And provide information. I would almost think that when we check into this story, we're going to find out that the churches are actually being paid by the government. But it is still, regardless of which way the cash is going, this is just terrible. The church that you go to on Sunday is literally spying on you to look for reasons for the government to take your children away. And, of course, if your kids are in that Sunday school, they're totally under the control of the church staff. Mm-hmm. To be asked questions about what's going on, like do you have guns in the house?
Yeah.
Are you doing marijuana? And I don't think that was really what churches were supposed to be about. I mean, Can you imagine Jesus as a narc? Actually, they went the other way. That's why he couldn't wake them up on the Mount of Olives when the Romans are coming up.
Yeah.
You know, wake up, John! The Roman legions are coming. Oh man, leave me alone. Anyway.
The next thing I'd like to talk about is the cost of high technology to the people at the very bleeding edges of it. And a very interesting article out of Blacklisted News. And it was talking about various places in the world where kids are conscripted to mine for elements that go into smartphones and technology and computers, where kids, I mean very young kids in China who are getting just no money whatsoever are literally prisoners of a factory situation. And there's been a massive suicide rate, and, you know, they've just put more bars on the window.
These minerals that they're being exposed to are toxic.
Yeah.
And then there's the other end of the situation. After you have your new Wizzo device for the recommended 5-year time, or 3 in the case of a cell phone, and you turn it all in, it has to be disposed of, and it all gets shipped out to some other third world country where they smash it all up and try and recover the precious metals that are inside, and those people are poorly paid and exposed to highly toxic effluents from the process. Because what they'll do is they'll take all of the tablets and cell phones and computers, and they literally burn them to burn away the plastic and the phenolic and all the other, and leave the precious metals behind. And that smoke they're inhaling is highly toxic. But these people are all considered disposable as long as Americans get the new iPhone 6S.
Yeah. And that made me wonder. We've been able to go as far as what's called fair trade coffee.
Yes.
Why not fair trade technology?
Well, because then U.S. companies would not be able to compete with the foreign companies. But the question I have is, we're hearing about all this influx of robots coming into retail stores and everything, displacing American workers. Wouldn't it really be better to be designing robots to do this kind of mining work and disposal work?
I agree.
And save the humans? And again, it goes back to a comment I have made many, many times before. As we descend into fascism, this overwhelming need to get more of these pieces of ink and paper that we may pass on to the bankers has destroyed what was best in the American character. We've stopped caring about anything other than grabbing more of the money. And it is a horrible taint. And it is certainly not the America I knew when I was younger. And nobody had a problem with being rich. I'd like to be rich myself. But there must be balance. We must get rich by putting out good, healthy, safe products that work and perform a benefit for the customer, not just the latest piece of junk fad that we're going to make a huge amount of money on, and doesn't matter where it comes from or where it goes. You know, it's rather amazing to see all these people out here screaming about human-caused global warming and demanding we pay a carbon tax, and they argue about our little plastic bags, and yet we don't hear them say a word about the very environmentally damaging way that we dig raw materials out of the earth, make them into something that lasts only a few years, and then throw it into a landfill, repeat. That is far more damaging to the environment than a few plastic bags. And yet, you never hear the carbon Nazis talk about it. You never hear Al Gore talk about it. All they talk about is, you must pay us a carbon tax. You will pay us a carbon tax. You will pay us a carbon tax.
Well, they're probably very heavily invested into a lot of these tech companies.
Of course they are. Al Gore wanted to be the first carbon billionaire, and he didn't succeed, but let's not feel sorry for him. He ended his presidential campaign against Bush flat broke, and now he's a multimillionaire from all this carbon trading nonsense, bought himself a seaside home in California. So much for his idea that oceans were going to rise and flood the coastline.
Yeah. But it is an issue that does need to be addressed. You know, when you're talking about child labor, that riles me.
Absolutely. I agree with it. And you know, we're just flogged into wanting the latest, greatest device. I mean, I'm getting all these emails from my cell phone provider, you know, about how I shouldn't have to wait. I should come in today with my current iPhone, whatever it is, I forget the model, and you can get the iPhone 6S. You can be hip and cool because you've got an iPhone that's just like the iPhone you have now, only it's a different color. Or whatever the difference is supposed to be.
It's almost as though they're trying to get people to believe that their technology defines who they are as a human being, rather than their thought processes, rather than their integrity and their character.
You're absolutely right. It's marketed as fashion accessories. I remember when Microsoft's first Surface came along, and they had those commercials of the kids dancing in formation and slapping and cracking the tablets together. It was an image sell. You know, you've got to have the iWatch, you've got to have the iRing, you've got to have the latest and greatest. And yeah, it's tied in with our self-esteem. It's the same way they market fashions and cosmetics and the latest cars.
Yep.
And in a healthy economy, you can get away with that. We don't have that economy right now. And I have absolutely no intention of upgrading my cell phone until I absolutely need to. Because I know whatever the new iPhone is, it's got more of the NSA spyware in it. In fact, to be very honest, I'm beginning to think about going back to a couple of Dixie cups with a wax string between them, because Claire is the only one I ever call on my cell phone anymore anyway. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to Claire here, we're getting reports now from Roseburg, Oregon, where Obama went out there to wave the bloody shirt and push his gun control agenda. And the corporate media, as would be expected, is showing Obama and excerpting his speeches, and your guns are bad and everything. We're starting to see filter over the independent media photos of what actually went on up there, and thankfully nobody showed up with a gun, but there was a huge crowd of protesters carrying signs, "Go Golf." Alrighty, good for the people of Roseburg.
Yeah.
What's next?
Apparently, and this was not covered on the corporate media at all, Beijing has slammed Washington's plans for incursion into the South China Sea. Now, today it said that it would not tolerate violations of its territorial waters as the United States is considering sailing warships close to Beijing's man-made islands in the disputed South China Sea. And apparently a Pentagon official, this comes from Sputnik News, said that the United States was considering sending ships within the next 2 weeks to waters inside the 12 nautical mile zones that China claims as territory around islands it's built up in the Spratlys.
Well, you know, there's going along with that, I saw this actually on Fox News a few days ago, where the U.S. government has stated they do not recognize artificially created islands as part of the sovereign territory of China. And so, again, they're stumbling and falling with Russia, but hey, any war will do. Let's go after the Chinese.
This is absolute madness, because the sanctions against Russia have pushed Russia and China a lot closer, both militarily, as we are seeing with Syria, and also economically. If they do this, it is pure, absolute madness.
It was a mad policy to begin with, but unfortunately, the U.S. government has gone too far down the road. They can't just quit and turn around without the U.S. economy imploding instantly. So they're in this sort of victory or death mindset. Unfortunately, it's their victory and everybody else's death. But they are going to fail. And when they fail, on that day when the U.S. government finally accepts they're not going to win against Russia and China conventionally, that's when they'll uncork that nuclear arsenal.
Ouch.
Yes.
And also, apparently, our U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter is predicting that Russia is going to face reprisal terror attacks on Russian soil because of their military action in Syria. And Mike, I have to wonder, is Ash Carter predicting or threatening? What's your take?
I think it's the latter, threatening. They're going to take all of these ISIS terrorists who are leaping over the border out of Syria, and they're going to redeploy them. We know already that up in Ukraine, they're predicting ISIS is going to take revenge on Russian soldiers inside Ukraine. That one is not going to work out too well. There aren't really any Russian soldiers inside Ukraine, but it looks good in the headline press. But yeah, now that the world understands the U.S. creates these terror groups, any terror attacks inside Russia are going to be assumed to be U.S. covert actions.
Yeah, it's nasty. I am hoping that saner heads in the Pentagon are going to prevail, and in the Navy, and say, maybe this is not a really good idea to do right now, while Russia and China are joining forces against the terrorists in Syria. Not a good plan.
Well, unfortunately, all the sane heads in the U.S. military were encouraged to retire or resign, or like Mike Boerder, were simply knocked off to get them out of the way of the grand plan for global conquest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd sort of like to bop over right now to Afghanistan.
Okay.
And apparently, 14 years into this horrendous, epic fail, NATO is talking about further extension of their mission in the Afghan war. And they are echoing recent Pentagon calls for, quote-unquote, flexibility on the plan to withdraw most of the troops in the country sometime after 2016.
Well, they kind of have to. Those pesky Taliban won't stay conquered, which was, of course, is what led to that battle at Kunduz, in which the U.S. bombed a hospital and is out there trying to say the Taliban did it. Putin made us do it. It was a mistake. It's collateral damage.
Any one of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was only a few years ago, apparently, that there was soaring anti-war sentiment across Europe, had many countries looking at setting a firm deadline. But it seems that setting the deadline calmed the public enough that many believe they can now simply push the bar back and no one will really notice. Well, NATO and Secretary Carter, I have noticed.
Me too.
This is insane.
Yes.
And, of course, it only makes sense if there are, quote-unquote, limited forces to protect the growth and shipment of the opium crop, which has magically risen like crazy under the U.S. NATO occupation.
Plus, they got to protect that pipeline that was the original cause for the invasion of Afghanistan.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's insane, and it's yet another indication that both European governments and the United States governments are no longer listening to their people at all.
No, they're high on that Afghan opium.
Yeah, and it's terrible. I mean, I do not feel that I am at all represented by any element in government at all at this point.
Nope.
You know, it's the people who are the 1%ers, not the entrepreneurs, you know, not the people struggling to get a business going. And I mean, as many of you know, I do marketing for a living. And looking at some of the databases, the numbers of companies that have just gone kaput, and these are companies that were making, 12, 14 million a year, gone, completely demolished by the current economic trends. It's really awful.
It really, I mean, everybody knows a crash is going to happen sometime. We don't know when, because the money junkies have the printing presses and the computers, and Congress will just change the rules to whatever they think will keep things going on a little bit longer. But they know they're past the point of no return, and basically the thinking is, I just want to paper it all over and make it look good until my successor takes office, and then after that, I don't care if it implodes.
Yeah.
Not my problem anymore.
And we do need to keep reminding people, please try not to panic, plan.
Yes.
Make sure that you are stocked up on long-term stored food, on water treatment so that water that will be pure. Make sure that you have any kinds of medications you will need for yourself or your pets. Make sure that you can protect what you have. Don't keep any more in the bank than you absolutely have to, because the haircut that came for Cyprus and Greece will be coming here to the
They're
US.
already talking about it. They're already in the next crisis. They're going to help themselves to whatever you've left in the bank. That's why they're pushing the cashless model.
Yeah.
They want to force you to put all your wealth in the bank where they can take it whenever they want. And, of course, this links into the situation. Buy physical silver and physical gold.
Yeah.
Physical tantalum, palladium, platinum, whatever you can, stash it wherever you can. You need to get familiar and be ready to use firearms. This thing, unfortunately, could get very ugly before it's all over. But at this point, we have a government that will not change course, will not admit error, will not turn around.
Yeah.
So we're stuck. We're going to have to ride out the collapse of the U.S. government, just like the Russians had to ride out the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And it's very, very important, and I know a lot of our listeners and readers have kids in school. Please find out what the policy is for being able to pick your kid up in case of an emergency. that you are able, that you know what the policies are, and that you talk with your family about how you get together if in fact you were separated. Mom and dad are working at two different places, the kids in school, in some kind of school, but people need to know how to make that work.
The procedure to get a kid can be very complicated, and we learned that the hard way when we were trying to help our neighbors out. Anyway, we have to take a commercial break. Back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, our last segment of our Pauhana Friday show here. And Claire, what else do you want to talk about?
Well, the last article, courtesy of Rense.com, it's called Killing Fields. Are Israeli forces preparing for another genocidal massacre of Palestinians? And apparently, last night in Jerusalem, new clashes saw more wounded Israelis and a Palestinian shot dead, and tensions are rising very intensely. And of course, Netanyahu, being Netanyahu, is blaming all of this on the native Arabs and Palestinians and the foreign countries who support them. He blamed recent violence on the Palestinian Authority and Hamas in Gaza. And he made the statement, all of us were in the midst of a wave of terrorism, terrorists that are incited, filled with hatred, and trying to hurt people, said Netanyahu. And apparently a number of people believe that the IDF is preparing to mount one of their biggest killing sprees after last year's cull, if you will, in Gaza, which was a form of genocide.
Well, you need to remember, I got to get you a cross switch. It's already come out. They've got it on video. The IDF are dressing up like Palestinians to start the violence. Mm-hmm. The Palestinian woman who was shot had her hands in the air. That was caught on video. This is classic Israeli false flag. Cause a ruckus, blame it on the Palestinians, and uncork a major military action. It could be Sabra and Shatila all over again. Mm-hmm. Which, if you ever mention that in public, there'll be somebody there screaming at you that you're a dirty, filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the oven. Because that's the only thing they can say. Every time they carry out another war crime, another atrocity, all they can scream is, Holocaust, Hitler, Hitler, Holocaust, we suffered so much, you should just ignore us.
Well,
I'm sick and tired of it.
The world can't anymore. And what I think is happening here is that Netanyahu wants the violence to escalate as an excuse for the next serial genocide against Palestinians, and is, as you have mentioned, using the IDF as his own personal picador to make this happen.
Well, Israel has a prior pattern that any time there is any kind of a major event going on anywhere in the world, Israel will make its moves against Palestine under that media cover. So that while the American corporate media is talking about McCarthy in the House of Representatives or Syria or Russia or whatever, Israel will go ahead and do what they're going to do against Palestine, knowing that the European and American media are just not going to give it a high priority. Of course, here in the independent media, we will give it a high priority because that's exactly what's going on. And I'll tell you another reason why I'm getting sick and tired of all this, the references to whatever it was that was supposed to have happened in World War II. All those people are now dead. All of this stuff happened before we were all born. I am 63 years old now. Okay? And whatever it is that supposedly happened in Germany was over and done with, along with Germany itself, before I was even born. Mm-hmm. And I am not to blame for it, and I don't care about it, and I'm sick and tired of hearing about it by people who desperately want to drag us all back to 1940 so they can guilt us out of money and political privilege and special care. No, this is 2015. It's the 21st century. It is time for everybody to live in the modern world today and deal with the war crimes and atrocities that are taking place before our very eyes here and now. We can do something about those. We can't change whatever it is that was supposed to have happened in World War II in Germany. We can't change whatever it was that was supposed to happen in World War I. We can and should challenge the evils that we see before our eyes today, here and now.
Yes. And I am hoping that things are going to calm down in terms of the U.S. making accusations against Russia. But as you have mentioned, Michael, there are so many people who are so invested in a war, even though it may well go very badly for us, that I think that's the way foreign policy is going to get swayed. Well,
again, you know, the bankers love wars, and they don't care which side wins or loses because they make money off of both sides. They'll loan everybody the money for the weapons to fight the war. When the war is over, they'll loan everybody more money to rebuild from the war. And when the scam is all over, ordinary people like you and I, we have more or less what we had to begin with, except the graveyards are a lot bigger, but we are now back in debt to the bankers for another 100 years. That's the scam. And all of you need to remember a very hard reality. Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and now we are into big mistake number 3. And the bankers are rubbing their hands together because war is the bankers' richest harvest. They just crank out that ink and paper and numbers in a computer, and we all act like it's something real.
Yeah.
And all it really is, you know what one of these banker notes is? This is a permission slip from the bankers to do what we otherwise would do on our own. It's our permission slip to buy a home. It's our permission slip from the bankers to start a business. It's our permission slip from the bankers to eat and feed our family. And I think we need to evolve to a world where we don't need the permission of the bankers and their printing presses to live our lives. And certainly not to have to wind up dying so that they can conquer more places for their ink and paper.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I would caution to all of our readers and listeners, a lot of us are under a lot of stress right now and pressure. And what we need to do the best we can is to be kind to ourselves and kind to the people around us, because if you are feeling pressure because of awareness of all of this stuff going on, everyone around you is too. And we need to be gracious and kind to ourselves and everyone in our world.
Yeah, we do need to take a break away from it a little bit. I mean, Claire and I were just talking. As soon as the show is over, I'm going to take her out to lunch, and we're just going to kind of get out for a while. We live in Hawaii. I don't remember the last time we went to the beach.
I don't either.
You know, and we should. We're here. Let's go out and act like tourists for a while here.
Yeah.
But this stuff can be so overwhelming. We live with it. It's in our home, and sometimes we forget that we need to walk away from it a little bit.
And compartmentalize.
Yes. And it does get very intense with all of this, and all the hacker attacks on the server, and all of this other stuff. These legions of propaganda shills that are now following me all around the corporate media to shout, "You're a liar! You're a liar! You hate women! You hate Hillary! You dirty, filthy anti-Semite Jew hater!"
Folks, he does not hate women. I will tell you from personal experience over the last 23 years, this man does not hate women.
No.
And you know, but the liars are paid. You know, and we are sort of relying on the kindness of strangers, if you will.
Meaning donations here. Who was that guy, the guy who created those 5-minute energy drinks, and he's incredibly rich, and he says he's got more money than he needs, and he's starting to give it out. Over here.
Well, God bless him.
What we need is some insane millionaire who feels guilty for how they got rich to die and leave us a couple of million for us to do our work here. And then we could get rid of the donations button and the advertisers and the rest of it. But it is rather sad that we live in a world where known liars like Brian Williams are getting $8 million a year to go on lying.
How does that happen?
And everybody who's out there trying to tell the truth is either broke or like Arthur Topham looking at going to jail. And that tells you how completely upside down the world is. And then you wonder why kids are deciding that this is the way they should be. Because they're seeing the liars get what they want, the cheats get what they want.
And the ruthless.
Get what they want.
Yeah.
And it makes our next generation, coupled with virtually no real education from Common Core, they almost do seem tailor-made to be the new Nazi horde spread across the planet.
Yeah, it's very difficult to look at what passes for education. And one small story that I would like to conclude with. There was a lady, a very proactive mom in Texas, who looked at a textbook that her son brought home, and where it was said that African workers were guest workers in the United States.
Well, yeah, they basically glossed over the fact that there was slavery and said the Africans migrated to the U.S. to be in the workforce. Yeah, I mean, they're real. It's 1984.
Yeah.
Rewriting history. Got to get out of here. Have a good weekend. Aloha, America.